We all know the story of Super Mario Bros. 2, right? It's one of the most often echoed pieces of video game history, but for those of you who are unaware, here's a brief rundown. Super Mario Bros. 2 was released in Japan in 1986, 1 year after the release of the smash hit Super Mario Bros. This sequel was effectively just an extended version of the original game, with the key difference being its excruciating, punishing, and borderline unfair difficulty. Nintendo of America eventually decided not to release the game in the US, as its difficulty could be seen as off-putting to American audiences. I commonly see it echoed that there was this generalized, condescending sentiment that the game was too difficult for Western audiences, but it seems much more likely that Nintendo feared its difficulty could damage Mario's growing Western appeal after the success of the first game. As such, the decision was made to release a reskinned version of the 1987 game Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic as the West's version of Super Mario Bros. 2 instead. This reskinned version replaced the original game's characters with Mario, Luigi, Toad, and Peach, and made minor changes otherwise. In the West, this version would be treated as the canon version of Super Mario Bros. 2 forever, with the original eventually being released in the region under the name The Lost Levels in the 1993 compilation Super Mario All-Stars. Nowadays, American players can happily play both versions of the game comfortably on their Nintendo Switch through the online service. And that's the story. Again, this is one of the most often repeated pieces of video game history that I can recall, and most Nintendo fans, as well as gamers in general, tend to have at least some degree of familiarity with it. That said, I've taken an interest in the inverse situation. How much exposure have Japanese audiences had to our version of Super Mario Bros. 2, the reskinned Doki Doki Panic version? In this video, I wanted to talk about it. This is the history of Super Mario Bros. 2 USA in Japan. Obviously, if we're going to talk about this version, we need to start with the game that it was reskinned from. Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic was released in Japan in 1987 for the Famicom, the Japanese version of the NES, and was made in collaboration with Fuji TV's Yume Kojo 87 event. Nowadays, the thought of Nintendo just in-house developing a promotional game for a TV station is pretty wild, but this was pretty early in their life, so I guess it makes sense. Due to it being directly tied to a Japanese television event, this game was obviously never released in its original form in the West. When the decision was made to transition Doki Doki Panic into Super Mario Bros. 2, it was done with the knowledge that the Western audiences hadn't been exposed to the game before. As such, releasing Super Mario Bros. 2 in the same region that its original game was reskinned from seems pretty archaic, right? Well, Nintendo didn't think so, as they chose to release the US version of Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan after a few years had passed. In 1992, Nintendo released Super Mario Bros. USA for the Famicom. This game, being marketed as the American version, was released in Japan in September of 1992. Keep that year in mind for a second. This version of Super Mario Bros. 2 was literally unchanged from the American version, save for a new title screen. The choice to release this game was definitely strange, especially considering its release year. This game was dropped on the Famicom in 1992 when the Super Famicom, or Japanese SNES, had already been out for 2 years. That wasn't unheard of at the time, after all, Mega Man games were still coming out for the NES until 1993, but this was a near 5-year-old Mario game being released on the NES when Super Mario Bros. 3 and more importantly Super Mario World were already out. When compared to other things on the market, it definitely seemed a bit strange and archaic at the time. We don't have any concrete numbers on how Super Mario USA sold in Japan, but luckily we do have a review archived. Thanks to the website Legends of Localization, we do have an archived Japanese review of the game from Famitsu. This review was surprisingly pretty lukewarm, criticizing the game for its outdated nature, its similarities to Doki Doki Panic, and the fact that it just felt unnecessary. For reference, Doki Doki Panic reviewed at 31 out of 40 points in Famitsu, whereas Mario Bros. USA reviewed for 24 out of 40. This was definitely a low score for a Mario game at the time, but I definitely do appreciate this line of the review that mentions them expecting a more, quote, American-styled Mario game. I guess the Famitsu reviewer was expecting Mario to wear a cowboy hat and holding a burger, huh?
I love America! Thank you! Hot dog! Mac! Barbecue! America!
But, surprisingly, despite the archaic and outdated nature and the lukewarm reviews, this wasn't the end for Super Mario USA. The game would end up being released again as a part of the Mario All-Stars pack named the Mario Collection in Japan, and it would get a sort of updated remix release as a part of Nintendo's obscure Satellaview radio console in Japan, titled BS Super Mario USA Power Challenge. It would also see regular re-releases over the years alongside the American re-releases, and is, just like in America, currently playable on the Nintendo Switch online service in Japan. So I guess this game did have a happy ending after all. This is one of the weirdest and most interesting parts of Nintendo's history in my opinion. Everyone talks about the conversion from Japan to America, but nobody talks about the inverse. It's weird to think how reverse localizing a game that was 5 years old was something that Nintendo would have thought was necessary at the time, especially considering the time of release. I hope this video was at the very least interesting to you, and I hope it taught you a little bit about Nintendo's more obscure history. Thanks for watching.